The city monitored the effectiveness of these measures, gathered and reviewed feedback of community, city operations, and emergency services. Based on that input, in 2023, Council approved the next step to replace the temporary pilot measures with permanent infrastructure. Therefore, the project is advancing through design and implementation of permanent traffic calming improvements along Moray Street. Tonight, we are going to share an update on the design refinement process, project benefits, and updated schedule, and we will wrap up with a Q&A session at the end. The presentation will be led by Steve Carney, the Manager of Transportation Capital Works from Epplin Martin, the design consulting firm for the project. We are also joined by Stephen Judd, the project sponsor and Manager of Infrastructure Engineering at the City of Port Moody. Please note that attendees will be muted during the presentation, which will be recorded, though the Q&A session will not be. Please feel free to share and submit any questions via chat. Now I will hand this session over to Steve. Steve?
Well, thank you, Cassie, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for attending the information session tonight here on Moray Street on the traffic calming project. And so really this session here is really just to provide the residents on Moray with an update as to where we are. And so a quick overview of some of the project objectives. Really, it's, the objectives of the project are to reduce vehicle speeds, improve pedestrian safety, achieve safe cycling facilities, and really just improve road safety for all users. Next slide, please, Cassie. Now, before we get into the project design, we'd like to just recap some of the background here. So Moray Street carries about 7,000 vehicles a day. It's a pretty busy connection between Port Moody and Coquitlam, as I'm sure you all know. We have a posted speed of 30 kilometers an hour, which was actually put in place prior to the pilot project. However, despite the 30-kilometer an hour speed zone, we still have been hearing, the city has been hearing of safety-related concerns, related to speeding. And so in the spring of 2022, Mayor and Council endorsed a traffic calming pilot. And we call it a pilot because it was a temporary installation to measure really the effectiveness of the change. And that was done using flexible delineator posts, some temporary curbing, and what we call a chicaning effect, which is sort of introducing that sort of lateral shift in the roadway, in the travel lanes. And really that's all intended to reduce speeds and therefore improve safety. The pilot also included a new solar-powered rapid flashing beacon, and so that's at the crosswalk. There at Pinda, and the pilot extended from St. John's to Brookmount at the border with Coquitlam. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, the pilot was implemented in the summer of 2022 and was immediately found to be quite effective in reducing speeds. And so as a result, in the spring of the following year, in June, Mayor and Council voted to make the pilot project permanent, based on feedback collected from the public, but other user groups such as like the city streets operations groups and fire departments and garbage collection, things like that. So they endorsed the concept, but with allowance for some adjustments to sort of fine tune it and to optimize it, again based on feedback received. And so this graphic here really shows the layout in the pilot project. And again, this was the concept that was introduced as part of that temporary installation. Involved the delineator posts, curb corner bulges and the crosswalk at Pinda. That now the line work for the curbing, of course, that was the delineator posts, those flexible plastic posts. Those sort of map out that geometry. And that's pretty typical for a pilot project where you use those flexible posts to essentially replicate what you're wanting to test in terms of permanent geometry. As mentioned, the effect of this is to really reduce that lane width. And so you can see here that lanes went down to about 3.3 meters, a little bit wider as you go down to St. John's. But the effect of the reducing the lane width and again the chicaning in the what we call the alignment of the roadway really does have the effect of reducing speeds. Yeah, and as mentioned, it was observed to be quite effective in doing so. Next slide, please. And so, in terms of pros and cons and what worked well, and one of the benefits of these pilot projects is that you have the opportunity to observe traffic operations and then make those adjustments as you need to. But what we found was that as I mentioned, it was quite effective in reducing speeds and improving safety through that sort of traffic calming effect. But it did have a few cons, and those included no cycling facilities in the northbound direction, no pedestrian or cycling facilities on the west side of Moray, and of course, that's not something we would introduce as a pilot because that would require a more substantial investment in infrastructure. Another con, it was no crosswalk at Brookmount, which again is right on the border with Coquitlam, and finally a loss of parking on the east side. So this graphic here really shows the updated concept with a few notes, and I'll just speak to some of these notes here. Probably the biggest change is going to be the addition of the cycling and pedestrian facilities. And so in the northbound direction, which is on the east side of the street, we have a northbound dedicated bike lane adjacent to the existing sidewalk. The curbs largely stay in place where they are in this concept, so there's no adjustment there. On the west side, however, there is a multi-use path that allows for both pedestrians and your uphill cyclists, which are the southbound. The chicaning in terms of the curb bulges and the center line chicaning is largely the same as the pilot project. And so those are the sort of the main differences. The rapid flashing beacon at Pinda is made permanent. There's new street lighting and some additional landscaping as well. There's also, you'll notice some additional crosswalks for across the minor roads that have that green painted asphalt to kind of highlight that, bring more awareness to the presence of cyclists for motorists, just as a bit of a safety enhancement. Yeah, I think those are some of the key points there. Maybe just on in terms of the shift in the multi-use path on the west side between Pinda and Moray Place. The reason that shifts a little bit towards the east is to avoid some large trees in there. And then so any other trees that are impacted, the city will be replacing at a 2-to-1 ratio as per the tree protection bylaw. And I think those are really the key features. There is some parking retained on the west side between Brookmount and Pinda. I would say the majority of the parking, there is a slight reduction just because where we do have that chicaning effect right at the intersections, we would have to restrict parking there. But between intersections, parking would be allowed. Next slide, please. So this slide here shows sort of a before and after. And when I say before, that would be the current pilot, so the existing condition. So the top slide shows that current pilot looking north. You can see the 30 km/h speed sign, and it's a little bit difficult to see, but in the distance you can see the what we call those delineator posts, those flexible white posts. The rendering on the bottom shows the condition after the project as we currently envision it. And so what you can see here is really the key change is the addition of the northbound cycling lane, and that's currently shown as behind a like a concrete curbing. And of course, we would have brakes at driveways to allow for vehicles for all those turning movements. And then on the west side, you can see the what we call a multi-use path. And that is between the existing curb and hydro poles. And so that's all within the city's existing right of way. And again, that multi-use path allows for pedestrians, and it would also allow for southbound cyclists. And the reason we like the idea of this arrangement is that the northbound cyclists, because they're going downhill, would be going relatively fast. And so you wouldn't want to mix those with pedestrians. And so we keep the existing sidewalk and introduce that northbound bike lane, a dedicated northbound bike lane separate from the sidewalk. But in the uphill direction, it's a better use of, let's say it's a better use of space. It's more economical in terms of the space required to have a multi-use path. And because it's uphill, the cyclists will be going slow. And so we feel that that'll be a safe combination. And it fits nicely within the existing hydro poles and the existing curb. The the graphic, so what we call the cross section. So that's that sort of design drawing at the bottom right there. That just shows the parking adjacent to the multi-use path on the west side, the two travel lanes, and then the bike lane and the existing sidewalk on the east side. And so that cross section is again looking north. Next slide, please. A couple more cross sections here. So this is really the one on the left shows the parking. And so again, we have the multi-use path, the parking lane, two travel lanes, and then the cycle track, which I think we're looking at that being what we would call a bike lane. And so that would be at grade with the existing road, and so using the existing asphalt as a way to reduce cost. And then we would, as I mentioned, we would keep that existing curbing and sidewalk on the east side. The cross section on the right-hand side, this is where we have the chicaning, or similar like where we have curb bulges, we would not have room for parking. And so this just sort of illustrates what it would look like without the parking. And it would be, again, sort of in limited sections where we have either that chicaning or the curb bulges. So really just at the intersections. Next slide, please. So just looking at the benefits and benefits and costs of the updated concept. Really, it's the benefits include the active transportation infrastructure that we're adding. So that's both the cycling and the multi-use path. Also the crosswalk at Brookmount. And so this one is pending on support from the city of Coquitlam because they own the half of the intersection where there is a sidewalk. So we would want to put the crosswalk on the south side. And then we also have some of the benefits are having mountable curbs to accommodate the larger vehicles. And again, just reducing the lane widths to further encourage the speed reduction. Crosswalks, again, as I mentioned, on the minor roads with green paint added for safety. Some of the costs or what things to consider as well are some of the impacts to trees, the cost of the multi-use path, and the loss of parking. But again, the loss of parking is it's in relatively localized areas, and quite a bit of the parking is retained on the west side. Next slide, please. In terms of project schedule, the design has been occurring over the past several months, and we're looking to start construction pending funding approval as early as really as early as summer 2025. And the construction duration would be relatively quick. It's not a highly complex project in terms of construction, so probably just a couple of months is our estimate at this stage. But of course, this depends a bit on the availability of contractors and things like that. But we're expecting that this could be built within 2 months. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that really takes us to the end of the presentation here. So maybe what I'll do is I'll just pause the recording, Cassie, and then we can take, happy to take any questions.